There are men who fall apart the moment something goes wrong. They raise their voices. They slam things down on counters. They drive too fast and call everyone they know and make the whole mess somebody else's burden to carry. I have never been one of those men. 63 years old, 35 of them spent turning wrenches for the City of Hamilton Water Division, until my knees and my supervisor both told me it was time to retire, and I have always been the quiet kind. Quiet when things were good, quiet when Ruth was sick, quietly letting things slide past me that I should have stopped cold, while I told myself that quiet was the same thing as steady. Standing in the arrivals hall at Terminal 1 in Pearson on a Wednesday afternoon in February, watching two plainclothes officers step into my son's path as he came off the Air Canada flight from Vancouver, that quiet finally had somewhere to go. He still had his ski tan. He was dragging a snowboard bag across the polished floor, laughing at something one of his friends had said, sunglasses pushed up on his head, like the whole week had been nothing but clear skies and fresh powder. He looked 23 and careless and completely unbothered, and then the officer said his name. The laugh died. The easy posture disappeared. Everything he'd been performing in that airport dissolved in about half a second. His friend, the tall one Caden, who always has something to say, spotted me from 40 feet away, standing near the support pillar with my hands in my coat pockets. He pointed. He said it loud enough that the couple next to me turned to look. That's his dad. He did this. I didn't answer him. I kept my eyes on my son. I watched the officers explain what was happening. I watched his face move through shock, then confusion, something that looked a great deal like genuine terror. And when he finally looked up and found me through the crowd, I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there and let him see me not moving. Welcome to Dad's fierce revenge. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you didn't start in that arrivals hall. It started the way most things that matter start, quietly in an upstairs bedroom with an empty cedar box sitting in my hands. Let me take you back 4 days. I had just come in from shoveling the front walk. We'd had 8 centimeters of wet February snow overnight, the kind that packs heavy and makes a 63-year-old back feel 68. I pulled off my boots at the side door, hung up my coat on the hook Ruth put there in 1996, and did what I have done almost every morning since we lost her. I went upstairs. I don't talk about this habit, not to my brother, not to the neighbors I've had coffee with for 20 years. It is mine, and it has stayed mine because some things need to stay private or they stop working. I go into our bedroom, I still call it that, probably always will, and I sit on the edge of the bed and I open the second drawer of Ruth's old dresser and I take out the Cedar jewelry box. Some mornings I just hold it. Some mornings I open it and look at the brooch sitting on its square of ivory satin, and for a few minutes she is close enough that I can breathe properly again. The brooch belonged to Ruth's grandmother. She brought it from Yorkshire when she immigrated in 1952, everything she owned packed into a single trunk on a ship from Liverpool. She came through Pier 21 in Halifax with that trunk, $40 Canadian, and enough stubbornness to outlast 3 prairie winters and a husband who turned out to be less than advertised. The brooch is Victorian, a carved ivory cameo set in gold, a woman's profile in relief, and when I had it properly appraised 5 years ago, the jeweler told me its value sat somewhere between $4,000 and $4,500, depending on the buyer. Ruth wore it pinned to her dress at our wedding in the fall of 1987. She wore it to every funeral after that, which is what her grandmother had always done. Something about honoring the people you were saying goodbye to with something that had already outlasted everyone it had ever loved. When Ruth was in the hospital in those last 2 months, she reached for my hand one afternoon and told me to keep the brooch safe. She didn't tell me what to do with it eventually. She didn't give me instructions about who it should go to or when. She just said, keep it safe, and looked at me the way she looked at me when she meant something past the words, and I said I would, and I did. I came upstairs that Thursday morning, opened the second drawer, and picked up the cedar box. I knew something was wrong before I opened it. The weight was off. That is the only way I can describe it. The box was too light in my hands, the way a room feels wrong before you can name what's missing from it. I opened it. The ivory satin square was there, the brooch was not. I want to describe that moment accurately, because it matters to understand what came after. There was no anger, not right away. It was more like the floor tilted, like something fundamental had shifted, and my body registered it before my mind caught up. I stood holding that open box for a very long time. I checked the other drawers. I checked the small dish on the dresser where I keep my watch. I checked the shelf in the closet, and the fireproof lockbox in the bottom of the wardrobe where the insurance documents and the original appraisal have lived since 2019. And then I sat down on the edge of the bed, because some part of me already knew. Had known from the moment I felt the weight of the empty box. There is only one other person with a key to this house. I called him. 4 rings. Hey Dad, noise behind him, music, voices, wind, already somewhere outside. Where's your mother's brooch? Silence, then smooth, almost too smooth. What are you talking about? The cameo, the cedar box in the bedroom, it's gone. More silence, long enough that I could hear something shift on the other end of the line. I don't answer me. He exhaled, and then he said it. I want you to understand that this was the moment, the exact sentence that changed everything. He said, it's just an old pin, Dad. You never even wear it. It was just sitting there. Just an old pin. Your grandmother emigrated from England with $40 in a trunk, I thought. Your mother wore it at our wedding. She asked me in the hospital to keep it safe, with what turned out to be some of her last good breath. And you called it an old pin. Did you sell it? I said. A pause. Then, I had to get money somehow. You wouldn't help me. What was I supposed to do? His voice tipped into something aggrieved, like I was the one who needed to explain himself. The line went dead before I finished answering. I stood in that bedroom for a long time after, then I put on my coat, my boots, and I drove. But before I tell you about the drive, I need to tell you about the 3 years that made it necessary, because nothing like this arrives without a long runway behind it. It builds the way ice builds on a roof, gradually, quietly, each layer adding to the last, until one morning the whole thing lets go. Ruth died in the spring, 3 years before the brooch went missing. She was 59. Ovarian cancer, 13 months from diagnosis to the funeral, and I won't dwell on that except to say that if you know that kind of loss, you don't need me to describe it, and if you don't, I genuinely hope you never do. My son was 20 when we buried her. He and Ruth had been close in the particular way of a mother and son, who are too alike to always get along but too attached to ever stay apart. Her humor, her stubbornness, the habit of being right about things they had no business being right about. When she died, he broke in ways I could see and ways I couldn't, and I told myself that my job was to hold steady for both of us. I didn't push back, not once, not for 3 years, not on a single thing. Because I was terrified. I had lost one person, and I genuinely believed that if I made my son sit with a single consequence, I would lose the only family I had left. So I accommodated everything. I told myself accommodation was the same as love. He left Mohawk College in his first semester. I'd already paid the tuition and the book deposit. I told myself he just needed time. He moved into an apartment on the lower end of the city, and I covered half the rent, $500 a month, without being asked. He lost 2 jobs in 8 months, and I didn't say what I thought. I dropped off groceries, I transferred money, $200 here, $150 there, just for the month, which became every month. I told myself things would settle. He came home for Christmas and sat across the table from me for 3 days looking at his phone. I asked about his life. One-word answers. I said I loved him before he left. He said, okay, just that, okay. And I told myself at least he was still coming. The first time I said no, the first actual no, 3 years in, was 11 days before the brooch disappeared. He called asking for $1,800, a week in Whistler with a few friends from the neighborhood. Flights from Pearson, hotel in the village, lift passes, lessons for one of the friends who'd never skied. He walked me through the numbers like a business proposal. I did my own math while he talked. $1,800 was more than I'd managed to put into my RRSP that entire quarter. The pension from the water division was reliable, but I was no longer working, and costs had climbed in a way that nobody on a fixed income had fully recovered from. I thought about the furnace I'd been nursing along for 2 winters. I thought about my own property taxes going up again in the spring. I can't do it this time, I said. I'm sorry, I genuinely wish I could. Are you serious, right now? I am, and This is so typical. You've never wanted me to have a life. You don't want me to travel. You don't want me to have friends. Want to keep me stuck here so you're not alone? This is about control. It's always been about control. I started to say something. He hung up. I thought he'd cool off the way he always did. I thought in a week we'd pick up where we left off, pretending the sharp edges hadn't happened, which is what we had learned to do in place of actually addressing anything. I had no idea that before he even finished that phone call, he was already on his phone looking up which pawn shops on Barton Street opened before noon. I drove every block of that stretch before I found it. A place called Crown Loan and Pawn, fluorescent lights in the window, security bars on the front. The man behind the counter was named Hank, 50s, reading glasses on his nose, the careful expression of someone who has heard every version of every family story there is and has stopped being surprised by any of them. I described the brooch, Victorian cameo, ivory and gold, woman's profile in relief, a small manufacturer's mark on the back of the setting. Hank didn't say anything. He reached under the counter, turned a binder to face me, and there was a photocopy of my son's Ontario driver's license on the intake sheet. Young guy came in yesterday afternoon, Hank said. Told me it was his late mother's. Left behind by her, he said. Family property. His late mother's, which was in the narrowest technical sense true, but not the way he said it, not with any right attached to it. Hank went into the back and came out with the brooch in a small plastic bag. He set it on the glass counter, and I put my hand flat on the surface because my knees had done something unexpected. Hank watched me without comment. He paid you to take it from me, I said, which was not the right sentence, but was the only one I had. He gave me $600 for it, Hank said. Between what he got here and what I understand he'd borrowed from one of his friends, I'm told he had enough to cover his flights and his portion of the week. Look, I don't want to profit from a family situation, but I cannot hand this back over the counter to you. That's not how it works. Under the law, if this is stolen property, it needs to go through the police, and they need an evidence hold order before I can release it to anyone. I had the original appraisal in my fireproof lockbox at home. I drove back, got it, drove back to Hank. He had already called the non-emergency line. By the time I set the appraisal receipt on the glass, a constable from Hamilton Police had arrived. Her name was Constable Arseneau. Late 30s, efficient, the kind of officer who's handled enough family situations to stay level while the people around her don't. She cross-referenced the appraisal against the carving details and the hallmark on the setting, filled out the required forms, and then she folded her hands and looked at me directly. I have to ask you something before I proceed, she said. What your son did, the theft and the false declaration of ownership on the intake form, those are criminal charges. We're looking at theft under $5,000 and potentially fraud in relation to property. That sits on a young person's record. It can affect employment, travel, all of it. I can flag his return at Pearson. He's flying back Wednesday through Vancouver, you said. But once I process that, I can't pull it back. She paused. Are you certain this is what you want? I thought about Ruth in the hospital. I thought about what she asked me. I thought about 3 years of absorbing everything and calling it patience, and one phone call where a piece of her grandmother's history got dismissed as an old pin. Yes, I said, I'm certain. Constable Arseneau nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has seen this particular decision made maybe a handful of times in their career and has never found it easy to witness. All right, she said. I'll get the flag processed. Someone will be in position at Pearson when he lands Wednesday afternoon. Hank kept the brooch in his safe. I drove home through the East End in the dark, radio off, heater running, my hands completely still on the steering wheel. I expected to feel more than I did. What I felt was a clean, cold calm, the way the air feels after a storm has finally passed through and the pressure drops and everything goes quiet. That night I made the mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe some part of me needed to see it, of opening Instagram. He'd posted from the hotel. Blue skies above Blackcomb, a bowl of powder visible through the window, a caption that said, needed this reset. Grateful for good people. 20 minutes later, him and Caden and Priya, and one other friend I'd never met, arms around each other at the base of the gondola, golden afternoon light, every one of them looking like they had nowhere important to be and nothing pressing anywhere in the world. While I was sitting in a pawn shop on Barton Street getting an evidence hold placed on your grandmother's brooch, I thought, while I was standing in front of a constable showing a 30-year-old appraisal receipt to prove a piece of your family's history belongs to your family. Grateful for good people. Reset. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table and went to bed, and for the first time in a long time, I did not lie awake. Wednesday came. Constable Arseneau sent a text at noon. Flight landing at 2:40, Terminal 1, officers in position. She told me I didn't have to be there. She said it plainly. You don't need to come, we'll handle it. And I thought about staying home. I thought about letting the thing happen without a witness I had to be. And then I thought, for 3 years I have been the person who absorbs everything so he doesn't have to feel it. I needed to stand somewhere and not absorb it. Just once. I needed to be the father who showed up to something instead of the one who stayed home and smoothed things over afterward. I drove up on the 403 to the 401, 55 kilometers of February highway, dry and gray and relentless, the kind of drive you can do on a weekday afternoon without your mind having to be anywhere near the road. I parked in the short-term lot, paid the hourly rate, and went inside. I found a spot near a support pillar where I could see the international arrivals doors without being immediately obvious. His flight was on time. At 3:10 I saw him come through. Snowboard bag, ski tan, Caden behind him, then Priya. Mid-sentence on something, gesturing, and Caden was laughing. He looked young and returned and completely unaware that anything in the world had shifted. Two officers stepped forward. I watched it happen from 40 feet away. The hand mid-gesture dropped to his side. The posture changed. He turned instinctively the way a person turns when they need someone to tell them this is not real. Caden found me first, pointed, said what he said, and then my son found me through the crowd, and his face did something I hadn't seen it do in a very long time. It asked me something without any words at all. I didn't move. I kept my hands in my coat pockets and my feet on the floor, and I watched the officers guide him toward the side corridor. Caden stood there for a moment longer, looking at me like I owed him an explanation. I didn't give him one. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the parking lot. I drove home in the dark, made dinner, sat at the table, and ate it. My hand did not shake. He called at 9:47 that evening. One aloud call. I watched the screen ring, his contact photo from 3 summers ago, the two of us at my brother's place in Dundas, both of us squinting against the sun, him laughing at something out of frame. He looks like her in that photo, around the eyes. I answered on the 4th ring. Dad. His voice was already raw. Dad, you have to come get me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I'll pay you back for everything. Just please come. I sat there a moment. I wanted to get this right. I'm not coming, I said, and I'm not calling anyone. A beat? What, I'm your son? You are, I said, and I've let you down. Not the way you mean right now. I let you down by spending 3 years treating you like you were still too fragile to be held to anything, by handing you money and excuses and swallowing every consequence before it could reach you. I told myself that was love. It wasn't. If this stays on my record, I know, I said, that's real, and I'm still not coming. He said things after that, he cried. Not the kind of crying that's designed to get a response, but the kind that happens when something you believed about the world turns out not to be true. I listened to all of it, without hanging up. When he went quiet, I said, I love you. That is not going to change. But I am done stepping in front of every consequence before it can reach you. That is not protecting you. That was me being too afraid to be your father. The line sat quiet for a moment. Then I said, get some sleep. We will figure out the rest from here. And I hung up. The weeks that followed moved the way consequences move once someone stops standing in front of them. He spent one night in holding before a bail hearing. Bail I did not post. An old friend of his, a quieter kid I'd always liked, posted it eventually. The charge moved through the system. His duty counsel negotiated him down to a conditional discharge. 12 months of probation, 150 hours of community service, and a repayment order for the appraised value of the brooch. No permanent conviction on his record, though the charge itself would remain visible for a period. I understood that was the realistic outcome for a first-time offender his age. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel bad about it either. I called the landlord and gave proper notice that I would not be renewing my co-signature on the apartment lease. That was the end of the half rent I'd been covering. I transferred his phone line from my account to his own name. The grocery transfers, 200 here, 150 there, stopped. Caden stopped returning his calls within a week. Priya, a few days after that, a brief message about needing to focus on her own energy. The girl he'd been trying to impress with the whole Whistler trip, someone he'd mentioned a few times, who I'd never met, was simply gone. No conversation, no explanation, just silence. The same silence he had handed me across dinner tables for 3 years, landing back on him for the first time. 3 weeks after the arrest, he came to the house. I watched him through the front window, coming up the driveway in the same jacket he'd worn to his mother's funeral. He tried his key at the side door. He stood there for a moment, then he knocked. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch instead of inviting him in. Beside me sat a duffel bag packed with his remaining things, clothing he'd left in the basement, a box of childhood hockey cards from his old room, a few other items. I had packed it carefully. That mattered to me. Dad, quiet. The bravado was entirely gone. I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. I know, I thought. I know that, and it took something I don't have a name for to say what I said next. You wanted to be free of me, I said. You said I was controlling. You said I was holding you back. You took your mother's brooch and sold it for a week on a mountain, and you called a piece of your family history an old pin. You made that choice. Now you make the next one. This isn't fair. Probably not, I said. But you and I stopped having a conversation about fair the day you walked into that pawn shop. He stood there waiting for me to take it back. 3 years of me taking everything back. Every line I'd drawn that dissolved when he pushed against it. Every time I said I mean it this time and then didn't. He had learned, as completely as anyone learns anything, that if he waited long enough, I would soften. I didn't soften. I picked up the duffel bag and set it down in front of his feet. Then I went back inside and turned the deadbolt. I did not watch him go down the driveway. I had spent 3 years watching him walk all over me. I figured I'd earned the right not to watch this part. That evening I made myself a proper dinner, pork tenderloin and potatoes and the green beans from the freezer that Ruth always said I kept too long. I sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, listening to the neighborhood settle into the evening, a snowblower running 2 houses over, somebody's dog making a fuss about something it had decided was as important. Normal sounds, a normal Tuesday in February in Hamilton, and I could hear them clearly for the first time in a long time. After dinner, I went upstairs. I opened the second drawer of Ruth's old dresser. I lifted out the cedar box and sat down on the edge of the bed with it in both hands, the way I always used to. I opened it. The cameo sat on the ivory satin square exactly where it had always sat. The carved profile caught the last of the evening light through the bedroom window, the same light that had caught it every time, the same woman's face in relief, the same clean gold edge that had survived a voyage across the Atlantic and 100 years of being handed from one person to the next. 4 generations. Ruth's grandmother to Ruth's mother to Ruth to this drawer where I had promised to keep it safe. I thought about Ruth. I thought about what she would have said watching all of this happen. She would have been heartbroken. She loved fiercely, and she would have grieved this the way she grieved everything, completely and without flinching. But she also would have understood, because she was the one, long before any of this, who used to say that letting someone off the hook over and over again isn't mercy. It's just postponing the bill, and the bill always comes. Better it comes, she said, while they're still young enough to survive paying it. I had loved our son badly for 3 years. I had confused holding him harmless with holding him close. I had absorbed everything he handed me and called it patience, and told myself that one day he would look up and see what I'd been doing for him. He never looked up, he just took more, until he walked into a pawn shop on Barton Street and traded the last physical piece of his grandmother's story for a week of powder runs and Instagram posts about resetting his inner self. He sold his mother's brooch for $600 and a trip he will remember for a long time, though not for the reasons he planned on. He called it just an old pin. He got the charge, he got the probation and the community service and the repayment order, and the apartment he now has to fund entirely on his own. He got the friends who stopped calling once it stopped being convenient to know him. And I got the cedar box back where it belongs. I closed the lid slowly, set it back in the drawer. I sat there for a long time in the quiet, really quiet now. The snowblower finished, the dog settled, the neighborhood fully dark, and I let myself feel whatever it actually was I was feeling. It was not triumph. I want to be clear about that. There was nothing in me that felt good about watching my son come off a flight in handcuffs while strangers filmed it on their phones. There was no part of that Wednesday afternoon I would choose to relive for enjoyment. But there was a small, tired, 3 years worn-down part of me that had finally exhaled, like I had been holding a breath since the spring we buried her, and I had let it go, and the house was quiet, and the brooch was back in the drawer, and for the first time in a very long time, the quiet felt like mine. If this reached you somewhere real, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button while you're at it. I read every single one of these, and if you haven't subscribed yet, there are more stories where this one came from.